Hey everyone, it's time for our 6-month update to the Apolitical World Map. This project forms the basis of all of our videos, which really just present slices of the world map, all based on the same apolitical worldview, that the so-called politics of international law and diplomacy are really just diplomatic levers for factions to use to avoid war. This map cuts through that by recognizing only the reality on the ground, allowing viewers and anybody who subscribes to this worldview to more accurately analyze the world and the geopolitical events taking place in it. Now, this does, of course, involve taking on a measure of accepted callousness, recognizing the fact that the reason there are so many diplomatic levers to avoid war is because every time one of these borders moves, not only are soldiers dying and civilians displaced, but oftentimes civilians are caught up in the fighting. And as much as corporate media attempts to paint good guys and bad guys in war, the reality is that every side in war is self-righteous, believes what it is doing is right, and believes any crimes that it commits are justified. Because of this, anytime a border changes anywhere in the world, no matter the time or place, there is a high chance pillage followed the borders moving. Once you've accepted this, that no sides are quote-unquote good, but that all sides feel they are righteous, you can start to use resources that recognize this reality, such as our Apolitical World Map, to better inform your view of the world in a personal, political, or even a financial sense. With that said, let's now take a look at some of the changes that we've seen in the world map over the past 6 months. We'll start where our last video left off, in the Caucasus. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail because we just did 2 full videos on the recent war in the Caucasus, but that has indeed been the most prominent geopolitical conflict in the past 6 months, resulting in some of the more extensive border changes that we've seen in that span. The Armenian client state, the Republic of Artsakh, was forced back by Azerbaijani forces who claim the area as their sovereign territory. Because their opponent Armenia and its patron Russia did not recognize Artsakh and did in fact recognize the land as Azeri territory, Azerbaijan had almost a free hand to take it back. Its Turkish-backed drone warfare proved highly successful in capturing territory without much bloodshed. And as Armenia and Artsakh approached defeat, Russia would step in to save its position in Azerbaijan, brokering a deal to maintain a smaller Republic of Artsakh, this time guarded by Russian peacekeepers. And thus, despite the loss of some territory related to its ally Armenia, Russia was able to maintain a foothold in Azerbaijan and not let the country slip entirely into Turkey's sphere of influence. Azerbaijan having been part of the Russian sphere for over 100 years, but remaining emotionally close to its Turkic brothers in the Republic of Turkey, especially in the Recep Tayyip Erdogan era, where Turkey has presented itself as a Muslim power. This fact was enough to overcome the Shia-Sunni difference, and in fact, Azeri troops would raise Turkish flags over their captured cities in addition to Azerbaijan flags. Again, for more on this conflict, see our 2 recent videos mapping this war in real time. One of the other major border shifts that we've seen in the last 6 months occurred in Libya. Now, if you've looked at the Apolitical World Map since our original video, you would have actually seen the updated borders in Libya. The Turkish-backed Government of National Accord launched an offensive in the early summer, and I actually updated the map in July to have an up-to-date version for the collaboration we were doing with Toycat, and no additional offensives have been undertaken since then. But from the original May edition, the borders have obviously shifted a ton, as back in the spring, the Tobruk government of General Haftar was closing in on Tripoli and appeared to be ready to win the war and reunite Libya under his rule. Once again, though, Turkey's drone program proved the difference maker. The Government of National Accord, backed by Turkey, pushed the Tobruk forces, backed by Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, and to a lesser extent France, which despite selling weapons to General Haftar also recognizes the Government of National Accord as the official government, so France has more of a hedged position. But the Tripoli government was able to push the Tobruk forces back to the middle of the country, recapturing several important air and military bases. And since the middle of the summer, the conflict has been mired in what's essentially a stalemate, with Libya effectively split in 2. I decided to make the date of the updated map the end of November, so it's actually a little more than 6 months, and we'll probably then do another update in June. But in the time between November 1st and November 30th, an entire war occurred that's actually finished, and therefore the changed borders wouldn't have appeared on the map on November 1st nor on November 30th. If you look at Ethiopia, it looks just like it did back in May. However, from November 4th through the end of the month, what was effectively a civil war took place as the northern Tigray region, factions from which ruled the entire country of Ethiopia for about 20 years until 2018, defied the mandated national election postponements and held regional elections, confirming those factions that formerly controlled the entire country, namely the TPLF, or Tigray People's Liberation Front, in power in the region.
Following an alleged TPLF-organized attack on an Ethiopian military base,
the central government effectively declared Tigray to be in rebellion, and over the next month, Ethiopia launched a military operation to effectively recapture the territory. Now, even though at the time this map has come out, Ethiopia has accomplished this and has effectively recaptured its claimed borders, the TPLF, even after defeat, announced that they're going to be transitioning to guerrilla warfare. So it's possible that even though Ethiopia controls the region today, they may in the future lose control over patches of it should the civil war continue into a guerrilla phase. In Somalia, the lines that have been changing are not so much borders as lines of contact, with terrorist factions represented mostly by Al-Shabaab controlling large desert swaths in the south part of the country. Meanwhile, ISIS pokes a hole in Somalia's north, hiding out in the deserts. The Al-Shabaab rebels, however, have been severely weakened in the last 6 months, with their northeastern strongholds eliminated by American-backed Somali forces, which also cut through a large swath of Al-Shabaab territory in the southern part of the country. Now, some American ground forces did participate in these actions. Most notably, a CIA officer was killed in September. However, toward the end of 2020, America has announced that it's pulling most of its troops and intelligence personnel out of Somalia, following this summer's major successes, with Al-Shabaab now drastically reduced in scope. Now, the fight against various other Islamist and terrorist factions, such as the Islamic State affiliates in the Sahel and various other Islamist terrorist groups,
continues.
Despite these Islamic State affiliates remaining viable in Central Africa, Somalia, the Sinai, East Asia, and several other places, the Central Islamic State or Caliphate is now fully 100% eliminated. For much of the last 2 or 3 years, it has been 99% eliminated. However, ISIS still did maintain a stronghold in the desert centered around the Dubayat gas fields, the equipment and production of which was still controlled by ISIS until an operation in September of 2020 in which the Russian-backed Assad forces were able to recapture the Dubayat facility and completely eliminate the Central Islamic State. It's possible that without a central government to recognize them, the other Islamic State affiliates will now go back to being generic terrorist factions that don't proclaim any sort of government in the areas they control. It's also possible that they will remain under the banner of an Islamic State, even without the central government in Raqqa, or perhaps declare allegiance to another totalitarian Islamist state, such as the Taliban's Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, or perhaps even the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's hard to know. But what is known is that the Central Islamic State, based in Raqqa and hanging on in Dubayat, is now gone, at least for now. Another conflict that we've covered in the past on this channel is the Morocco-Western Sahara conflict. So if you're wondering how the borders of the Sahara got in such a strange shape, check out our 2 videos on that. But this conflict has threatened to break open for the first time in nearly 30 years. Sahrawi refugees blocked a Moroccan road to connect to Mauritania through the Sahrawi-controlled zone, with the Sahrawis pushing north into the demilitarized town of Guerguerat, located on the Moroccan side of the berm that separates Morocco from Sahara. Morocco then sent soldiers into the town, which the Sahrawis claimed was a violation of the ceasefire, despite the disruption caused by their protest. This could have been a coordinated action, as the Sahrawis then declared war on Morocco, and the ceasefire which has lasted since 1991, to be ended. The next day, on November 14th, Morocco claimed that the Sahrawis had tried to breach the berm in the northeast near their connection to Algeria at Al Mabes. The Sahrawis claimed that Morocco had prematurely come across the berm at both Al Mabes and at Guerguerat. However, the actual circumstances are murky, and the only facts that are known is that Morocco at some point crossed the berm 3 different times in 3 places, with both countries, especially the Sahrawis, which have so much of their population in exile, declaring mobilization. Morocco claimed to secure the border post at Guerguerat. However, the Sahrawis do still control the area between the berm and the Mauritanian border, meaning that no borders have actually changed, and the berm still designates the separation of the 2 sides. Whether these fairly significant skirmishes and the end to the ceasefire end up turning into a full-scale war remains to be seen. But what is certain is that the Sahrawis are in a much weaker military position than they were during the first Western Sahara War, and their territorial position today is also much worse than when the previous war began, with the current borders having been created as a result of the Sahrawis' effective defeat. Thus, while it's unlikely the borders will change, this certainly is one to keep an eye on in the next 6 months leading up to our next update.
Over in the civil war in Yemen, the South Yemen movement, backed by the United Arab Emirates and based in Aden, captured the island of Socotra from forces of the Hadi government, which they had been fighting against on the island for several months. Later, in the fall,
the government of President Hadi, the widely recognized Republic of Yemen, which appeared earlier in the summer to be on the brink of total irrelevance, has, with Saudi help, bounced back, recapturing large swaths of the desert in the northeast from al-Qaeda and other terrorist factions, thus at least allowing the Hadi government to focus on the actual civil war that it's fighting, which could change the tide of war, as the Hadi government has clearly been caught up for much of the year in extricating terrorist forces from land that its factional opponents didn't challenge, but it still had to fight for them. Now that this is over, it'll be interesting to see if this causes any major changes in the balance of power, with the Hadi government now freed up to pursue its rivals in Aden and Sana'a. Something else to watch out for would be a possible rapprochement from the Hadi-led Republic of Yemen towards the South Yemen movement based in Aden, which previously was a part of the Saudi-backed Republic of Yemen under Hadi, until it later seceded a couple of years ago with the backing of the United Arab Emirates. For now, though, as of the publishing of this edition of the map, there remains 3 different rival Yemeni governments, each with their own foreign backing. In Western Africa, a potential new state has emerged, as a faction emerged in September in eastern Ghana, which promoted the independence of Western Togoland, another name for the Volta region of eastern Ghana, which has an ethnic interplay with neighboring Togo, stemming from the drawing of colonial borders by the British, French, and Germans. However, despite putting up signs saying you're now entering Western Togoland, there's very little evidence that the faction actually controls this territory, though clashes are definitely ongoing. When more information is available and the situation becomes more clear, if Western Togoland is in control of some of the land that it claims, you'll then find it on this Apolitical World Map in our next update. Overarching all of this is, of course, the continued rise of the People's Republic of China and its rivalry with America, which has grown into effectively a new Cold War. One of the front lines of this, where borders have not yet changed but possibly could, is deep in the Himalayan mountains, where for a large part of this year, American-backed Indian forces have clashed with troops of Communist China, which have at times been deadly despite the fact that no actual firepower or ammunition is used. Both sides understand the implications of a conventional shooting war, and with both countries having limited amounts of nuclear weapons, both sides certainly want to be careful. However, they've still managed to find a way to fight this undeclared border war using clubs spiked with nails and other melee weapons, which have resulted in numerous gory deaths from being gouged or from falling off the great heights that oftentimes are involved in these mountaintop hand-to-hand clashes. The border itself itself has not moved at all on a level that would be recognizable from a map like this, although if you zoomed way in, China has in fact moved the line of contact several hundred yards toward the Indian side. Certainly the largest potential for wide-scale conflict emanates from disputes involving China, though other than the India clash, none of them has been particularly active in the last 6 months. These conflicts, however, including Taiwan, the Spratly Islands, and several other territorial disagreements, will remain in the focus of our channel over the next 6 months, as the Chinese Communist Party has numerous powder kegs which could explode prior to the release of the next map. If they do, we'll try to cover it in real time if we can, just like we did with the recent Caucasus War. With several old conflicts opening up again, it's never been more clear that the era of post-history is over, and as we wade carefully into this new era of Cold War and great power competition, having a worldview that understands that conquest and warfare are simply part of the human condition, and that every side always believes they are righteous no matter what atrocities they're committing, coupled with a tool to understand the unvarnished situation and reality on the ground, such as the Apolitical World Map, has never been more important. I hope you understand. I hope this inspires you to learn more. Go ahead and share this with your friends and family. Make sure they're up to date on the current situation in the world and not simply relying on corporate media. We will then, of course, be back to update this in about 6 months when the next edition of the Apolitical World Map comes out. But for now, that is a look at the world in 2020, accurate and unbiased. Thank you so much for watching. We've got a Patreon, so donate so we can keep this project going. I am Alex. I'm out.